The voice that saved her. The stars were quiet. All around her, the ship was falling apart. Sparks flew. Alarms screamed. The air smelled like burning metal. Her hands were shaking, but she held on to the cold metal wall, trying to stay on her feet. Her name was Zara. She was young, just a cadet in the alien space fleet. Her first mission had gone terribly wrong. Outside the ship, there was nothing but black space. Inside, chaos. Half the crew was already gone. Her captain had screamed for them to abandon ship before the main reactor exploded. But it was too late. Zara crawled through smoke and fire, trying to reach the escape pod. Her vision was blurry. Her lungs hurt. The emergency lights flickered red. Suddenly, a loud crack shook the hallway. A piece of the ceiling fell in front of her. She screamed. She was trapped. She fell to her knees, coughing. Her body was weak. Her hands were cut. She looked around, but she was alone now. The others had already escaped or died. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." Then, something strange happened. A soft voice came through her comlink. It was a human voice. "Hold on. I'm coming for you." Her eyes widened. "Who is that?" she whispered. "You're not alone. I see your ship. I'm docking now. Just hang on." The voice was calm, deep, warm. It didn't sound scared, even though her ship was about to blow up. She had never heard a human voice before. Her people told her humans were dangerous, wild, emotional. But this voice, it felt different. It felt safe. "Why would a human help me?" she asked. "Because you're alive. That's all that matters right now." Her heart beat faster. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he looked like. But somehow, she trusted him. She waited. The seconds felt like hours. The fire crept closer. She coughed again and started to cry, but silently. Then, a shadow appeared through the smoke. He was wearing a human spacesuit. She could barely see his face behind the helmet, but his movements were fast, confident. "Zara?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. He reached out his hand. "Come with me." She grabbed it. His hand was strong, but gentle. She noticed a scar on the back of it, a long thin line that crossed over his glove. He lifted her and pulled her toward the docking gate. The ship groaned around them. The hallway behind them burst into flames. "Move," he shouted. They ran together. Just as they reached the gate, an explosion threw them forward. Zara hit her head. Everything went black. When she woke up, she was lying on a metal bed. Her wounds were wrapped. The lights above her were bright. She sat up quickly. "Where am I?" A robot nurse rolled in and answered. "You are safe now. You are on a neutral medical ship." Her heart dropped. "Where is the human who saved me?" The robot blinked. "No human was recorded on this ship. You were found alone in a rescue pod." Zara froze. "No, he was with me. He saved me. He pulled me out." "There is no record of another passenger," the robot repeated. She stood up, ignoring the pain in her legs. "I have to find him." Her mind was spinning. How could he disappear? She searched the ship. She asked everyone. No one saw him. No one believed her. But she remembered everything. His voice, his words, and that scar. She had only known him for a few minutes. But in those moments, he had saved her life. And something else. He had saved her hope. That night, Zara sat alone by the ship's window, staring at the stars. She held a small piece of metal she had found in the escape pod. It was part of his suit, burned, broken, but on it was scratched the beginning of a name. Eli. That was all. Just a voice, a scar, and a half-name. But it was enough. Zara made a promise to herself. "I will find you, even if it takes my whole life." Outside, the stars continued to shine, a name lost in the stars. The stars didn't speak, but they remembered. And so did Zara. It had been 5 years since the rescue. 5 years since the voice, since the fire, since him. But she still heard him in her dreams. "Hold on, I'm coming for you." That voice had saved her life. A stranger, a human, a name she never knew, a face she never saw. Only a scar, only the start of a name burned into metal. Eli. Since then, she had become someone new. No longer a weak cadet. Now, Commander Zerave, leader of the 4th Sky Division, one of the highest-ranked alien fleets in the Outer Rings. She wore armor lined with silver. Her eyes held storms. Soldiers saluted her with fear and respect. But inside, she was still searching. Each year, she used her secret clearance to scan space traffic records. Human ships were rare in this part of the galaxy. Most stayed hidden after the human-Drake War had ended in silence. No one knew where Earth really was. Some believed it was destroyed. Others said it was protected by old technology no one could break through. Still, she searched. Zara had collected thousands of voice logs from emergency beacons, distress signals, and forgotten ships. Every night, she played one after another, closing her eyes, waiting to hear his voice again. But none were him. Not even close. One night, a trader ship docked at her fleet base. It was old, rusted, patched together with parts from at least 5 different species. The pilot was a smuggler named Carve, half Alkin, half human. He had eyes like glass and a smile full of secrets. "I hear you're looking for a ghost," Carve said, leaning on the table. Zara narrowed her eyes. "What ghost?" "The one with the scar," he replied, tapping the side of his hand. "A man named Elian Carter. Real quiet. Real strange. I saw him a cycle ago. On a dead moon." Her heart skipped. "Where?" "Planet Juno 7. No one goes there anymore." But he was there. Scar on his hand. Human suit. Lived in the shadows. Wouldn't talk to anyone. Zara stood. "You'll take me there." Carve smirked. "For a price." She paid him double. The journey to Juno 7 took 8 days. The moon was cold and quiet. A ghost town in space, once a mining colony, now a forgotten ruin. Zara walked its silent streets. Metal buildings stood broken. Dust floated like ghosts. Strange machines buzzed in the background. She found no one. No alien. No humans. Only echoes. She searched for hours. The trader grew nervous. "Let's go," he said. "This place is cursed." But she refused. She climbed over broken staircases. She scanned life forms. Still nothing. And then, behind an old power station, she saw it. A message, carved into a wall by a sharp tool. E. Carter was here. Her knees went weak. He had been here. She touched the wall, tracing the letters with her fingers. Below the name was a number. A set of galactic coordinates. A clue. A whisper in the dark. That night, as they flew away from Juno 7, Carve asked her something strange. "Why him?" He said, "Why risk everything for one human?" Zara stared out the window. Her voice was soft. "Because he didn't ask who I was. He didn't care if I was human or alien. He saw someone in danger, and he saved me." Carve nodded slowly. "That's rare." Zara closed her eyes. "I owe him more than my life. I owe him my soul." Back at her command ship, she studied the coordinates. They pointed to a restricted human colony hidden behind a broken asteroid belt, a place no alien was allowed to visit. Old laws. Old fear. The map called it Earthside 9. A dead zone. But maybe he was there. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Or maybe he didn't even remember her. The thought made her chest ache. She stood in front of her ship's window, stars blinking like distant eyes. "I'm coming," she whispered, just like he once said to her. "I'm coming for you." The forbidden planet. Zara stood alone in front of the viewing glass, her silver uniform glowing in the soft blue light. Behind her, the stars stretched out like an endless sea. But she wasn't looking at stars. She was looking at the dark shadow in the distance. Earthside 9. A forgotten human colony. A planet hidden behind an asteroid field. Off limits. Dangerous. Silent. Her people had marked it as Red Zone. No alien ships allowed. No diplomacy. No contact. Anyone who crossed the boundary risked being shot down or disappearing forever. But Zara didn't care, because he might be there. The human who once saved her life. The man with the warm voice, the scared hand, and the name, Elian Carter. She had followed the coordinates carved into the wall on Juno 7. A message left like a whisper in time. Now she was ready. Zara left her command ship in secret, taking the small stealth pod. It was designed for silent entry. No alarms, no energy trails. She dressed in plain clothes, not her uniform. No one must know who she was or where she was going. As she entered the asteroid field, her hands tightened around the controls. Sharp rocks drifted across her path. One wrong move, and she'd be space dust. But she stayed calm. Her heart beat slowly. She was close. After 2 hours of careful flying, she broke through the asteroid wall. Below her, the planet came into view. It wasn't like the glowing alien world she knew. Earthside 9 was gray. Cold. Covered in thick clouds and broken cities. Fires burned in some areas. Rusted towers stood like skeletons. But she saw signs of life. Lights. Smoke. Hidden tech signals. Humans. She landed her pod far from the main city, in a quiet forest. The trees were tall and sickly, but they gave her cover. She stepped out, pulled her cloak around her, and began walking. She didn't know what she would find. She only knew who she was looking for. The human city was surrounded by metal walls. It looked like a prison. Drones flew in circles above. People moved fast, heads down. No one smiled. No one spoke loudly. Zara walked carefully through the outer streets. The buildings were falling apart. There were no signs, no colors, just gray walls, blinking lights, and tired faces. She saw children playing with old robot parts. She saw a man sleeping on a bench with a weapon in his hand. She kept her hood low. Humans here didn't trust outsiders, and if they found out she was alien, they might kill her. But none of that mattered, because somewhere in this city, Elian Carter was alive. She searched for 2 days. She asked no one. She just watched. She followed faces, watched hands. She looked for that scar, the long, thin line across the right hand. That was her only clue. She entered old shops, food stations, trade zones. She wandered night streets. Every time she saw someone with a scar, her heart jumped. But it was never him. Her hope began to fade. On the 3rd day, she sat outside a power station, pretending to rest. Her legs ached. Her eyes burned. For a moment, she closed them. Then, she felt it. A presence. Someone bumped into her shoulder. "I'm sorry," the man said quickly, moving past her. Zara froze. The voice. It was calmer now. Older. Deeper. But it still had the same warmth. She turned her head slowly. There, walking away. A tall man in a black jacket. Quiet. Careful. His hair was dark. His walk was smooth. She saw his hand. The scar. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. She stood up fast and followed him. He walked through narrow paths, past guards, into an old building. She waited. Then she followed. Inside, the place was filled with old tech and blinking screens. He was alone, checking devices, muttering to himself. Zara stepped forward. "Elian Carter," she said softly. He turned, surprised. His eyes met hers. "Do I know you?" he asked. Zara took off her hood. Her silver eyes shone in the dim light. "You saved me 5 years ago, from a burning ship." He blinked, confused. "I think you have the wrong person." Her heart sank. "You pulled me from fire. You spoke to me. You said, 'Hold on, I'm coming for you.' He looked at her hand, which now held the burned insignia she had kept all these years. He stared at it. "I don't remember this." "But your scar," she said. "Your voice. The message on Juno 7. It was you." He looked down at his hand. "Yes, I have this scar, but I've had it since I woke up here, 5 years ago." Zara's voice cracked. "You don't remember me." He stepped back. His face was tight. "I don't remember anything before 5 years ago. Nothing." She felt like the floor fell beneath her. "I thought you were looking for me too." He shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry." Silence filled the room. Zara turned to leave. Her mission was over. But then, he said something strange. "Wait," Elian said. She turned back. He looked at the insignia again. It feels familiar. I don't know why." Zara stepped closer. "Because it's part of you." He nodded slowly. "When I first woke up here, I had nightmares. Of fire. Of a voice calling my name. I thought it was just a dream. But maybe." He looked at her. "Maybe I knew you. Before." Zara smiled, but her eyes were wet. "I never forgot you. And now, I will help you remember." He doesn't remember her. The room was quiet. Zara and Elian stood facing each other, strangers, yet something deeper stirred between them. She remembered every second of the day he saved her, his voice, his hand, the moment their souls touched in fire and silence. But he didn't remember anything. Elian sat down slowly on the edge of a metal bench inside his small bunker. The lights above flickered. His face was pale, confused. "I don't know who you are," he said again. "I'm sorry." Zara didn't speak. She just looked at him. Not with anger. Not with sadness. With hope. Because she had seen the way his eyes paused on the burned insignia, the way his hand trembled when she said his name. There was something inside him. A piece of memory. Varied, but alive. Elian stared at the floor. "They found me near the dead sector. I was floating in a damaged pod. No ID. No history. Just this." He lifted his arm and pulled back the sleeve. Zara stepped forward. There it was again. That long, thin scar across his wrist. The same one she remembered holding in the fire. "I woke up with it," he continued. "The medics here said I was lucky. No brain damage. But no past." He looked up. "I thought I was no one." Zara shook her head. "You were someone to me." She sat beside him, her cloak brushing the floor. Her voice turned soft. "Do you want to remember?" He hesitated. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" He looked into her eyes. "What I might find." Zara reached into her bag and pulled out a small silver cube. Alien memory tech, rare and forbidden in human zones. "This," she said, "can pull locked memories if the person wants them back." Elian stared at it. "That's not legal here." "I didn't come here to follow rules," she replied. "I came for you." He took the cube in his hand. It was warm. Something pulsed in the back of his mind. A shadow. A flicker. A voice in flames. "Hold on. I'm coming for you." He gasped. "What was that?" he asked. Zara leaned forward. "That was you. 5 years ago. Saving me." They activated the cube. It hovered in the air, spinning slowly, releasing soft light and tiny sparks. Elian closed his eyes as Zara placed 2 fingers on the side of his head. "Breathe slowly," she whispered. "Let go." The first images came fast. Blurry. Broken. A ship exploding. A young alien girl trapped under metal. Her silver eyes, full of fear. His voice, calling out. Her name. Zara. He whispered it now, eyes still shut. Zara's breath caught. "You remembered." The cube flashed stronger. Another image. Him running through fire. Pulling her through smoke. A sudden blast, his body covering hers. Then, darkness. Elian gasped and opened his eyes. Sweat rolled down his face. His hands trembled. The cube fell, dimming. "I saw it," he whispered. "You. I was holding you. The ship." Zara nodded. Her eyes were wet. "You saved me." He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. "You were so young. And scared," she added. "But you didn't leave me." He gave a small smile, even when the ship was about to explode. "You stayed," she said. They sat in silence for a moment. The past was coming back, but only in pieces. Zara knew something was still wrong. "Elian," she said softly, "why don't you remember everything?" He looked confused. I don't know." She stood and began walking around the bunker, eyes scanning his belongings. "Did they do tests on you when you were found?" "Yes, at the medical center. Then they sent me here." "Did they ever talk about your identity? Try to find out who you were?" Elian nodded. "They said no records matched me. I was a ghost." Zara frowned. "Ghosts don't leave coordinates on moon walls." Suddenly, her eyes caught something on the back of his neck. Just under the skin, something glowed faintly. "Elian, what is that?" He touched his neck. "I don't know. I thought it was some kind of healing tech." She leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "That's not healing tech. That's a memory block chip." His eyes widened. "What?" "Someone implanted it in you to erase and control your past." She gently touched the spot. "That's why your memories come back in flashes. It's still blocking most of them." Elian stood up fast, panicked. "Then, who did this to me?" Zara looked him dead in the eye. "Someone who didn't want you to remember who you were, or what you did." They both froze as the lights flickered again. But this time, it wasn't a glitch. Zara's scanner on her wrist beeped. "A signal. Someone just pinged your location," she said quickly. "We need to move." Elian looked scared. "But whoa. Someone who knows your past is waking up," Zara whispered. "And they don't want that." She grabbed his hand, just like he once grabbed hers. "We run now. Together." He stared at her, then nodded. "Let's go." As they slipped into the shadows of the city, Zara looked back once at the bunker. A quiet place where a forgotten man lived. But now, he wasn't forgotten anymore. And neither was she. The secret he forgot. The city behind them was silent. Zara and Elian moved through the dark alleys like shadows, the cold air pressing against their skin. They didn't speak. Not yet. Their footsteps echoed softly, and every corner they turned felt like danger waiting to appear. Zara's scanner blinked again. Someone was tracking them, and they were getting closer. Elian pulled her behind an old machine shop. They ducked beneath a metal vent. "We can't run forever," he said, breathing hard. "We won't," Zara replied. "We just need to reach my pod. It's hidden in the forest outside the city walls." "How far?" 3 kilometers, maybe less. He looked around. "Then let's go before they find us." But he didn't move. Zara noticed it, the way he clutched his head, his knee shaking. "Elian." He fell to one knee, groaning. Images flashed behind his eyes again. A bright room. Screaming voices. Needles. Cold metal against his skin. A voice shouting, "Shut it down. He's seen too much." Another voice whispering, "Erase him. Start over. He can't remember the girl." He gasped. "I saw something," he whispered. "They erased me on purpose. They knew about you. About what I did." Zara's eyes widened. "Then it's worse than we thought." He looked up, breathing fast. "I was part of something. Something big. But why would they hide it?" They reached her pod an hour later. It was hidden beneath thick trees, covered by a camo shield. Zara deactivated the shield and helped Elian inside. He looked weak, pale, but his eyes burned with new fire. She placed him in the seat beside her and powered the ship. Then she connected her scanner to the chip under his skin. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm going to hack the memory block." "Isn't that dangerous?" She looked at him. "Yes, but if we don't find the truth now, they will find us first." The pod lifted silently off the ground and slipped into orbit. Zara activated the hack. The chip in Elian's neck sparked. He screamed. She held his hand. "Stay with me," she said softly. "You're strong enough." The screen flashed. One by one, locked files opened. And then, his past returned. 5 years ago. Before the rescue. Before the fire. Elian Carter was not just a pilot. He was part of Project Ember, a secret alliance mission between humans and a small group of alien leaders. The goal was to build peace, to end the silent Cold War between species. But many in power didn't want peace. They wanted control. Elian had witnessed a betrayal. His own commanders had sabotaged a peace convoy. Hundreds had died. The truth was buried. He had tried to expose it, but he became a target. They erased his records, labeled him dead, then used memory tech to make him forget everything. Except, he saved her before they could wipe him. Zara had been part of the peace convoy, a cadet in training, a symbol of hope. He couldn't let her die. So he broke the rules, risked his life. And that one act, saving a girl, was the reason they wiped him clean. Elian opened his eyes slowly. His body was shaking. "I remember now," he said. "They didn't just erase me. They erased the truth." Zara sat beside him, silent. He turned to her. "You were part of the peace mission. That's why I saved you. You remembered me. I remembered everything. Your eyes, your voice, the way you held on, even when the fire closed in." She smiled, but tears slipped down her cheek. "You gave me hope," she whispered. He nodded. "And you brought me back." Zara stood and began pacing. "This changes everything. If we reveal this truth, Project Ember, the sabotage, the memory wipes, it could destroy the ones in power." Elian's voice was calm. "That's why they're hunting us." Zara turned sharply. "We can't go back to the colony. They'll kill you." "Then we go forward," Elian said, "to someone who will believe us." Zara opened a secret channel on her ship, a signal only one person could receive. Admiral Kezran, her old mentor. He had been part of the Ember mission too, until he was removed and sent to a distant sector. If anyone could help, it was him. She sent the message with coded data. Then they waited. 2 hours passed in silence. Elian stared out the window at the stars. "Funny," he said. "All these years, I thought I was no one. Just a man with no past." She smiled. "You were never no one. Even without memory, you were still brave." He looked at her, a quiet fire in his eyes. "Would you believe me if I said I think I loved you, even before I knew your name?" Zara's breath caught. I've loved you since the day you saved me." The ship beeped. A message returned. "Admiral Kezran has accepted your call. Rendezvous in Sector 12 within 48 hours. Warning: enemies may intercept." Zara turned to Elian. "This is it." He nodded. No more running. But as the stars shifted around them, they didn't see the shadow following behind. A black stealth cruiser had picked up their energy pulse. Inside, masked figures watched their every move. One of them whispered, "Target has remembered. Begin elimination." Running from the Empire. The stars were no longer silent. They screamed through the ship's scanners. Warnings, heat signatures, unmarked crafts moving fast. Zara's face turned cold. "They found us." Elian leaned forward. "How many?" 3 ships. No ID. No signals. "It's them." Elian tightened the straps on his seat. His hand shook slightly, but his voice was steady. "They're coming to erase me again." Zara looked at him. No, not this time. She slammed her palm on the controls. Her small pod ship jumped into emergency mode, engines roaring as blue fire spilled out behind them. The ship jerked forward. Outside, the stars became streaks. Behind them, the enemy cruisers followed. Bigger, faster, armed with weapons far more powerful than hers. But Zara wasn't planning to fight. She was planning to survive. "Elian," she said, breath sharp, "we have less than 10 minutes until they're in range. If they fire, we're done." "Then where do we go?" "To Kezran." "Can we make it?" "Only if we use the storm route." He blinked. "You mean the plasma field?" She nodded. "No sane pilot flies through it." He smiled. "Good thing I'm not sane." The plasma storm drifted near Sector 12, a wall of blue lightning and wild energy winds. Most ships avoided it. Computers couldn't predict its currents, but inside it, scanners failed. Enemy trackers would lose them, if they survived. The pod entered the edge of the storm. Blue light flashed across the windows. The ship shook. Loud cracks echoed through the hull like angry thunder. Elian gripped his seat tightly. Zara's hands moved fast, adjusting levels, reading ancient flight maps by memory. Outside, the pursuing ship stopped. They didn't follow. Too dangerous. They waited outside, surrounding the exit point, a trap. Zara knew it. "We only have one chance," she said. "We get out right into them." Elian looked at her. "Then let's be ready." Inside the storm, everything became a blur. Lights, colors, wind, fire. Elian screamed as a lightning bolt struck the wing. Sparks flew inside the ship. Zara gritted her teeth, fighting the controls. Her eyes were locked ahead. "I won't let them take you again," she shouted. The storm pulled them like a wave. They twisted through fire. The ship spun sideways, alarms blaring. But at the very last second, they broke through. The stars returned, but they were not alone. 3 black cruisers hovered ahead, blocking the exit path. Their weapons charged, lights blinking red. Zara and Elian were trapped. "No way around?" he asked. She shook her head. "Then we go through." Zara locked the controls. "This ship has no missiles," she said, "but it has one thing." She pulled out a silver sphere, an alien flash flare. It created a blinding light for 5 seconds, enough to confuse enemy sensors. She tossed it to Elian. "When I say go, throw it." He nodded, sweat on his brow. She looked at him one last time. "If we don't make it." "We will," he said, cutting her off. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "I found you again. I'm not losing you now." The pod shot forward. Alarms screamed. Lasers flew past them. One grazed the side. The ship shook violently. Zara screamed. "Now." Elian activated the sphere and threw it out the window slot. A massive flash lit up space like a new sun. The enemy ship staggered. Zara slammed the thrusters. The pod shot between 2 cruisers, diving, spinning, rolling. Enemy guns fired, but too late. They were gone. 10 minutes later, the pod landed on a hidden dock near Sector 12. Zara collapsed back into her seat, breathing hard. "We made it," she whispered. Elian sat quietly, staring at her. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." She turned to him. "You made me brave." As they stepped out of the pod, a tall figure waited by the hangar doors. Admiral Kezran. His face was lined with age. His armor still shone. He walked with a cane, but his eyes burned with fire. "Zara Vey," he said, voice deep. "Still breaking laws." She smiled. "Only the ones that need breaking." Kezran looked at Elian and froze. "Elian Carter," he asked softly. "You remember me?" Elian asked. "I thought you were dead," Kezran replied. "They told us you died in the mission explosion." Zara stepped forward. They wiped him. "Memory chip," Hidden identity. We hacked it. He remembers now. Kezran's face turned pale. They'll do anything to keep him quiet. If the public learns what he knows. Then it's time, Zara said. We tell them. Inside the command room, Kezran pulled up the old files, what little was left of Project Ember. The truth was terrifying. Ilian had been the final voice on the peace team. He held proof of the sabotage. Messages, locations, names. If he spoke now, hundreds of powerful leaders would fall. War would end. But so would old orders. Zara looked at him. Are you ready to do this? He nodded slowly. I was born for this. That night, Zara stood alone on a balcony. Stars blinked above her. Somewhere out there, enemies planned their next move. But here, tonight, she had found him again. He stepped beside her, silent. I'm scared, she said. He nodded. Me too. She looked up. What if they kill us? Ilian took her hand. Then we die telling the truth. And maybe, just maybe, we live long enough to change everything. In the shadows of space, the Empire prepared its final move. And in the heart of two souls once lost, hope burned like fire. The twist of fate. The galaxy was watching. But it didn't know it yet. In a hidden command base near Sector 12, a truth long buried was about to rise. One man, long thought dead. One woman, once just a kid. Together, they now carried the power to change everything. Zara stood before the holoscreen, adjusting the settings. Her fingers moved quickly, scanning through frequencies, encryptions, and signal channels. Ilian stood behind her. His face was calm, but inside, he was shaking. Are you ready? She asked without turning. He paused. No. She looked at him. But I'll never be ready. And that's why I have to do it. Zara nodded slowly. Then we begin. They opened the feed. Across multiple star systems, military satellites, hidden space colonies, neutral trade hubs, and even pirate stations, the transmission cut in. A face appeared. Ilian Carter. Alive. Speaking. His voice, calm and steady, carried across the stars. My name is Ilian Carter. 5 years ago, I was part of Project Ember, a secret mission meant to bring peace between humans and alien allies. But the mission was betrayed. Our leaders, both human and alien, did not want peace. They feared it. So they killed everyone, buried the truth. They tried to erase me, but I survived. And now, I remember everything. Across the galaxy, eyes widened. People stopped what they were doing. Soldiers paused. Civilians stared. Even leaders who once thought him dead leaned forward in shock. Zara stepped into the frame. He saved my life when I was just a kid. He didn't care what species I was. He only cared that I lived. That is the meaning of peace. That is what they wanted to destroy. They played the recovered files. The proof. Video logs. Messages. Sensor data from the Ember mission. Evidence of the betrayal. Names. Ships. Orders. It was undeniable. Truth spread like wildfire. And so did the fear. In the Empire's deepest towers, leaders shouted. Systems locked down. Panic rose. But the people, they cheered. Zara ended the broadcast. For a moment, there was silence in the room. Then Kezran's voice crackled over the intercom. You did it, he said. The truth is out. But there was no time to celebrate. Because just then, the alarm screamed. Enemy ships had found them. 10 black cruisers, full military force, sent not to question, not to capture, but to erase. Zara turned to Ilian. We're not running this time. He smiled faintly. Took you long enough to say that. The battle began in orbit. Kezran's defense ships launched quickly, but they were outnumbered. The Empire's forces closed in fast, trying to silence the voices that had just changed the galaxy. Inside the base, Elian and Zara ran to the control tower. "We can't fight them all," Kezran said, loading a blaster. "But we can make sure you two get out." Elian shook his head. "We're not leaving you." "You have to," Kezran replied. "The truth must survive." Zara looked at Elian, then at the data chip in her hand. "What if we give it to the people directly?" She pulled Elian to the main core. "There's a frequency pulse option," she explained. "We can upload everything directly into the public data cloud. Once it's there, no one can erase it. But it'll make us a target forever." She smiled. "We've always been targets." They started the upload. Outside, explosions shook the sky. The command base trembled. Enemy troops landed. Kezran fought to hold them off. Zara and Elian stood over the core, guarding the upload. Elian turned to her. "You know, I used to think love was a feeling." She looked at him. "And now?" He smiled gently. "Now I know. It's a choice. One you make, every day. Even when it's hard. Even when you don't remember. I chose you once. And I choose you again." Tears filled her eyes. "I never stopped choosing you." The upload reached 99%. Then, boom. A blast hit the building. Zara fell. Elian grabbed her. Blood trickled down her arm. She pushed him. "Finish it." He turned to the panel. "One more second." Upload complete. A green light blinked. All data sent. Every truth free. Enemy soldiers rushed in. Kezran fell. The last defense lost. Zara pulled herself up, stood beside Elian. The soldiers raised their weapons. By order of the Empire, the lead soldier shouted, "You are to be eliminated." But then, the order changed. Their comms screamed, "Stand down." Repeat, "Stand down." You're too late. The truth is out. They are protected by new law under Galactic Treaty 8. The soldier paused, then slowly lowered his weapon. All across the galaxy, protests rose. The people chose to protect Elian and Zara. New leaders spoke up. Old leaders fell. The war paused. Talks began again. And for the first time in years, peace had a real chance. Weeks later, on a quiet moon near Sector 5, Zara and Elian stood under a real sky. Not metal, not glass, just sky. Stars above, grass beneath. She looked at him. "Do you regret any of it?" He shook his head. "Not a moment. Even the pain." He smiled. "Especially the pain. Because it brought me back to you." They held hands, watching the night. No alarms, no running, no hiding. Just silence. And love. Because in the end, she looked for him across the stars. And in a twist of fate, he found her again.